Today, we're at the OSU Portland Center, and we're joined by Dr. Lynn Sproul and by Stacy Lang, who are going to discuss our topic, When the Family Stresses the Business. Anytime that the Family Business 360 series focuses on the family issues and family discussion, it is very popular, very much of interest, very important to the families. So I'm really glad that we have these two experienced advisors who are going to walk through some of these topics with us today. So this is a confidential webinar format. Your microphones are disabled. So that's why it's important if you have a question as you're hearing the conversation, use the Q&A prompt at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to pass your questions along to the speakers during our conversation over the hour. However, many of you have already submitted questions of interest when you registered on this topic. So we already have a lot of material to cover just as we're getting started. Again, the webinar will be recorded. It's accessible next week on the Austin Family Business Program Family Business 360 webpage. So let me introduce Lynn and Stacy, and that will get us started. Some of you may already know Dr. Lynn Sproul. He's the former dean of the College of Business and the founding dean, I like to say, of the Austin Family Business Program. Lynn earned his PhD in management from the University of Michigan, and he served as the dean of the College of Business from 1983 to 1987 before serving as the vice president for communications at Oregon State. He then followed that part of his career and transitioned working as a director at Stoll Reeves in Portland. I must say he's one of the busiest retired executives that I know, and he works with family business owners, particularly in coaching and consulting. Stacy Lang, who's joining us, has a master's in social work from Portland State University and is a licensed clinical social worker and a certified alcohol and drug counselor. She has been counseling families and individuals for over 25 years and has taught in the alcohol and drug addiction counselor training program at Portland Community College. She's been a member of the Family Firm Institute, which is the premier professional development organization for family-owned businesses, and that's how I met Stacy. So I'd like to welcome you both today. So this session is going to be a little different. It's really a conversation. We're going to answer some questions that family business owners have submitted. But to get us started, let me ask each of you to help me to describe your general practice in advising family businesses and perhaps the types of clients and engagements that you work with.
Let me start. In general, I focus on two things: generational transition, and that's across generations, from generation 2 to generation 3, leadership in the family business. Within generation, there are challenges shifting from one leadership model to another leadership model within these generations, and all the stuff that's engaged in working with individuals in transition, some of which Stacy knows far more about than I do. The second piece of what I do is focus a lot on governance. I'm a big believer in that if you don't know what the rules are, it's really hard to follow them. And rules are collaborative. You create mechanisms for managing and directing family businesses, but it's important to know what you are going to do and how you're going to do it. So I spend a lot of time on bylaws, shareholder agreements, commitment statements. Here are the things that here's how we're going to behave, here's what we commit to. And sometimes they're followed and sometimes they're not. And what I'm working usually and entirely now with businesses are doing exactly this transition from one generation to the next, almost entirely. And then there's another small set of folks who are in business and having some challenges with leadership within the generation.
Again, Stacy Lang, and as Sherry mentioned, that my focus has been primarily in the substance use disorder and treatment range for a very long time. So my engagement with family businesses have primarily focused on people who are either needing treatment or our families are talking about a problem that nobody wants to talk about. So figuring out ways to talk about the problem that is unspoken and very apparent. And so finding ways to consult with people about making forward progress. Do a lot of referring to other professionals, referring to treatment centers, referring to different resources that they might be able to use. And I also work directly with families. I tend to have quite a few parents. I find that the mothers, for some reason, tend to be the ones that keep coming. I don't know why that is, but maybe it's just the family dynamic where that's set up. The other interesting part of my work has also been as people marry into a family where there's a family business and how they begin to assimilate into the organization or not. And some of it works really well and some of it is pretty problematic. And then the other big piece is really working with people once they've gotten into treatment or in some other process where they need to be monitored and supported, and so helping talk about how what things can be put into the rules and how. But for me, I think the important part is also allowing that person who's re-entering the family, hopefully in a more healthy place, that they also gain, that it can be a win-win for the family, that the person is doing better and they then get to do more and be more part of the family, and then the family can also feel more whole again because the person they love is coming back into the fold. So those are really important things for me when I'm working with people.
So thanks to the both of you for your leadership in the family business arena. It's made such an impact on a lot of family businesses and generations of family businesses. So I think we have a good platform to get started today. The one kind of question I wanted to ask you to reflect on is, what has surprised you most, or what's been a bit unexpected in your long-term career in counseling family businesses?
Can we start?
Sure.
The extent of intergenerational conflict. I am constantly surprised just how intense the anger can be, how difficult it is for members of the same generations, brothers, sisters, cousins, to communicate openly and in a productive manner. I grew up with a sister and we bickered, but we were great friends and we still are. And I don't know what it would have been like if we had been in a family business, but the extent of that turmoil within the generation, that's one thing that has surprised me. The other is how rarely I have found I refer to as a founder, the person or persons presently leading the business, how ineffective their retirement planning is. There's absolutely no clue what they're going to do with their lives or how they're going to do it.
I think for me, the level of adaptation, which is similar to what you're saying, is the multi-generational things that get held, but the level of adaptation that happens where a problem can be a problem for a very long time and nobody wants to address it, and the incredible skill in which people work around it. And they're very creative, and it's just amazing the lengths people will go to not address something in a clear, assertive manner. And particularly with a founder has been my experience, because they hold so much, and you don't want to offend, you don't want to, and they may hold your paycheck. They may, there's a lot of dynamics that happen there. So that's always surprising to me, how creative and how much energy is spent dodging around, and then under that you have all that anger, you have all of the sort of things that become passive aggressive, and the silos that happen, and the triangulation that happens under all of that, and there's a different path that could be taken, and that's a very difficult task. And on the other hand, the other thing that provides me an incredible amount of hope is the family resiliency, and that at the end of the day, families are families and they love each other and they want to love each other, even though there's all this other minutia going on. And if they can get to that place where they can recognize that and recognize their resilience, because being a family business is not an easy task. No matter when you jump in, it's going to have a challenge, whether you're first or fifth or 10th generation, there's challenges. So you've had to have some resiliency in that process. So how do we tap into the resiliency and the family loyalty, fealty, you know, that's a big part of it. And so that allows me hope when I see the entrenched system and say, I know there's hope here. You know, I know we can get there. So
Wouldn't it be exciting if families that are spending so much creative energy and all this stuff trying to avoid the problem would spend about half that creative energy on fixing the problem?
Yeah.
It would be kind of remarkable.
Yeah, and because it's so, people, the number one thing I think when I first start to talk to people is just recognizing their exhaustion.
Mhm.
And it's exhausting. However you're doing this, it's exhausting. And it doesn't have to be that way.
No, it does not.
So we're kind of along that theme. Let me ask you about the beginning of an engagement. How does a good engagement to solve some of these really entrenched family business problems? What can families do to really get a good start at this? If they're, you know, like you said, they're in a lot of pain, they finally made that call to you. How do you help them keep that momentum going?
Again, we'll keep the order going.
Okay.
If the family is not ready to resolve the problem, then everybody's wasting their time. So I spend lots of time up front talking to people. Some wonder if I'm really just wasting their time, but you want to talk to every player. You want to talk to the company accountant. You can talk to the company lawyer. Talk to the company lawyer. Find out if they're really serious. Because if they're not serious, and it can become pretty clear pretty quickly, if they're not serious, you're wasting your time and your money. Don't do it. So that's my first approach, is to spend days talking to people and writing down everything I hear and trying to put it together, going back to check, did they really say that? And are you certain you want to do that? Because if you're not going to do anything, don't get started.
And in itself, that's an intervention when you pay somebody to come and they say, I'm not willing to do this because you're not ready. It can be one of those moments of like, oh, you're not going to just sail along with us.
Fired the client.
Right, and keep trying to hold us up when we're not ready, and that in itself can be an intervention.
Yes,
That's really
absolutely.
very interesting. Primarily for me is really trying to engage people and encourage respectful speech, trying to have some sense of empathy, to build some empathy in the system, which can be very hard to do when people are in a lot of conflict because they have an opinion, and empathy is the furthest thing that they have close to being available. But I think just the beginning of having some structure and some rules around, this is the kind of speech that's okay in our engagement, and here's some, and we'll stop if the speech is not respectful, or at least moving forward. And you don't have to be super rigid about that, but really have a feeling of trying to be respectful, which sometimes they haven't had a conversation in a long time where it got slowed down enough where people could actually listen to one another. And the hope would be for some empathy and understanding. And the other piece, I guess, is along that same line is somewhere in there some validation of the other person's experience, which is along the lines of empathy as well.
What does that look like?
Being able to slow down and say, well, what I heard you say was this, this, and this, and that's, it may be very different than my perspective. We're looking at the apples, we're looking at an orange, and one of us sees an apple kind of conversation. I can slow down and say, this is what I hear that you see, or you see as the problem. And I don't have to agree with that. I may try to accept that that's your view if I'm really feeling generous, but I at least have heard you say it and have repeated back to you that I've heard you say it. And there's something about just even using that language. And for the other person to just hear that person say that back is also really powerful. And it can be a starting place of, wow, we really have, this is classic couples therapy, we really have perspectives different perspectives about what color that apple is. Is it red or is it green? Because I see it totally different. But to begin that process.
And if you have these totally different sets of beliefs, trying to figure out how to get to conclusion, get to an agreement. If, you know, an old faculty member of mine once said, if I have a different axiom space than you, we need to resolve the axiom space issue before we try to resolve the issue. Because we're not talking in the same language. And I find that very regular.
I imagine in your work that with different generations, and we've talked a lot about this in FFI, all the different generations and how what's important to them, what's of value, what's not of value at all, and how the language just does not match. That's not a value. It's not a shared value.
That's right. That's right.
So I like that concept. We're gonna get to multiple generations, but I've got to tell you, most of the questions have come in about within a generation, and it's really about sibling dynamics. So I wanted to ask you what families can do to help address the tensions. Let's start in the workplace, where siblings are working together. Perhaps one is supervising another. Specifically, what happens when one sibling is passed over for a promotion. So how do you help your families address those resentments and tension when they're both working in the same workplace, in the family business?
Who's in charge? I'm a huge believer in there can only be one leader. I like people working together, but somebody has to make a final decision. Not everybody can have the same job in the business. One of the age-old problems in a family business is how you love them the same but treat them differently, because you're going to be treated differently. It's not easy. It's not easy. It's not, particularly if the birth order gets wrong. You know, we're so sort of progenitors are kind of related. The firstborn gets all the stuff. That's not necessarily the way it ought to be. The firstborn may be not very bright, or not at all interested, or the old school, the youngest sister may be the most qualified. There is no easy answer. There is an absolute disaster, and that is not talking about it, not addressing it. Hiding it does not work. Conversation, constant open communication helps, may never resolve the problem. I don't want to say it's insoluble, but it's one of those, it's pretty close. If you're offended, how you get unoffended is hard. That didn't help at all, did it?
Well, there are some structural solutions, as I understand, job descriptions.
Well, sure. I mean, that's a very technical kind of answer. I can tell you what my job description is and what your job description is. That means my kid brother reports to me. Well, my kid brother doesn't want to report to me. Well, just because you're a family member doesn't mean you're entitled to a position in the business. Just because you may be a shareholder, you're not entitled to a position in the business. If there's no job opening, there's no position for you, we love you, we treat you differently.
Yeah, I would say when the question was like, oh wow, because I don't have that structural, like what would you do inside? But I certainly have sat with people who have been in those positions where eldest not being seen as capable as other people, or they had they were in different parts of the organization, and how that was going to work out. And I think it's conversation. The leader, I think, is if you have a place to maybe affect change, would be if the leader is the leader, then how do you talk to the leader about
inclusive?
Yeah.
How do you make your family feel good about not leading this operation and still feeling a part of the family and a part of the company? Not everybody is the point guard on a basketball team.
And in your experience, are the leaders willing to take that on, to be that sort of middle person, particularly if they're the father, or do they hope for something else, or hope for the job description tells them what to do?
Sometimes the leader is cognizant of the issue. Others, I've been in situations where the leader simply says, get over it. And that doesn't resolve anything. But there are examples of leaders who are aware and are very, very careful to try to bring people in. Excuse me, but not always.
And I know the other piece of experience I have is someone exploring personally. So if they were seeing me personally, do I want to continue to work in the business? Do I feel like I have a choice about that? And they often don't feel like they have a choice, and they probably do. They're,
They do have a choice.
They do have a choice, but they may not feel that.
Yeah, they feel like they have, in some sense, done evil to the family if they don't want to work in the business.
It's betrayal.
It's a betrayal, and it's not. It's not. Not everybody ought to work in a family business.
And so that would be their own personal journey of, have I tried to address this? How have I tried to address this within the family? And if I don't seem to be getting any traction on addressing it in a way that's satisfying for me, is this where I want to be? Is this going to be a satisfying life experience for me? And not that we're out there promoting everybody leave the business, but for them to have the opportunity to explore. And the person I'm thinking of really wanted to stay, but really wanted to go, and ultimately really wanted to stay, but needed to find some peaceful way to do that for himself within the system.
And if someone wishes to go, oftentimes there's a sense, well, I'm letting my parents down, or I'm letting my sibling down because, we've all got to be in the business. Well, no, you don't all have to be in the business.
So what can that sibling who's the supervisor, how can they acknowledge their role and advising or supervising the younger sibling just to make it less awkward? What's good practice when you have those sibling reporting lines?
Lots and lots of communication, talking. It won't get better by leaving it alone, and it doesn't go away. And it may never go away. I don't think you all. This is not Pollyanna-ish. You don't because you bring a family business consultant in, it doesn't make all the problems go away. You try to talk about them. You try to create an atmosphere in which people can honestly say, you're not performing very well. Let's talk about how we make you perform. And it's not that you're not a good brother or sister. Your job work is not good. That's what we need to focus on. Knowing what hat you're wearing. Are you speaking to me as a family member? Or are you speaking to me as the leader of this business? And they're different conversations, and they all come together at some point.
And is this where someone like you in the system who could have a conversation starter like that to help navigate those sort of those pathways?
Sure.
Because you're not the father, you're not the mother, you're not the you're sort of out here.
Yeah. It's not my family, but I can, yes, and you would do the same thing. You would sit with people and try. Are you listening? Are you listening to what you're saying? Because they know the answers. They know the answers. This is not rocket science. They know the answers. It's just acknowledging that and moving off of old stuff.
So you've addressed it a little bit, Lynn, talking about roles. Stacy, your presentations are about the family business system. Let's talk about that sibling dynamic when you have siblings who work in the business and then siblings who have careers in other areas. Sometimes these resentments can build. So how do you pay attention to those? How do you address those or intervene those rather than letting them build?
That's a multiple layered question. The easiest situation is if you have siblings who are not engaged in the business They know they're not engaged in the business. They've talked about not being engaged in the business. They know that upon the demise of the preceding generation, if there's an estate to be distributed, they're going to get a different piece of the estate than are those engaged in the business. You don't go to Thanksgiving dinner with your entire family and talk about business if you've got people who aren't involved in the business. That drives them crazy. So, it's just clear boundaries, understanding. It's hard to say clear boundaries when you may have made this decision when you're 23 years old and now you're 45 and your siblings in the business are getting really wealthy, but maybe they grew the business. The decisions we make when we're 23 have major impact when we're 45. I think you remember that.
And on that same note, if it was a decision to not be part of the family business was your decision, or you weren't hired by the family, if it was your choice to be on the outside, I think that also, because people have not been invited in, maybe, I guess, or did work for a while and then it didn't work out. And particularly in the population that I see a lot of people who end up losing their jobs or being demoted, and then they are now outside the business due to their substance use disorders or their mental health issues. So they may have been on the inside and now they're on the outside for very specific reasons. And that can feel really hurtful. I'm the outsider, I'm the sick one, I'm the identified problem in the family, and I'm not even I've been cut out at some level. I may still have a piece of it, depending on the governance. But I certainly feel like I don't belong because I've done something wrong, and all the stuff that comes with.
And it amplified in a situation where you have a family member who has been in the business and for whatever reason chooses to leave the business for a period of time and wishes to come back, and there's no job available. And the person on the outside trying to come back in says to him or herself, obviously, well, I'm part of this family, why can't I work here? And the person running the business says, this is a business. We're not here. It's not, we're not here just to support you.
At your pleasure.
Because if we start making bad hiring decisions, business goes under. That's hard. That's really hard.
When can a family start talking to the kids about the business?
When can they or when should they?
When should they?
Well, let's just face it, they will from the moment the kids has any sense of understanding of any sort, 2 or 3 years old, because the family business is sitting at the dining room table. It is occupying, in many cases, the most favorite chair next to the parents. And so whether you wish to have the kids understand the business or not, they are going to understand. So you better introduce them to the business in a positive way. Make an effort to do it. Take them, you don't want your 3-year-old sitting in the CEO chair, but for a short period of time, that's kind of cool. You get a sense of but take them out to the warehouse. Take them and show them things. Be proactive, because if you wait for them to figure it out on their own, they're going to think you're hiding something.
And my experience with people is that they are often the favored chair.
Oh, of course.
The business has way more importance, and it may have to, because that's where the energy
how we're eating.
Right.
Yeah, that's where the food came from.
And when it's not addressed or understood, why are mom and dad both gone, or why is there so much, why are you gone on the Saturday when everybody else is playing ball and their dads are at the game, or all of the things that they just experience, and if they don't have a sense of how that works or why that.
What's the benefit?
Yeah, and this is how we may make a living different than Joey's parents, and it's exciting, and it's there's a lot that's really great about it, but like you say, to not hide it, because that just leads to what's wrong and why am I not? And for me, the thing I hear is, why am I not important? Why is that more important? And your work is more important. And then if mom or dad is home and the other person is going off to work and being the primary worker and the other person's being the primary parent, that the adult in the room can say, well, your mother works too much, she's always at the plant, or she's, then you get that dynamic, and the kid is like, well, work must be a bad thing, our business must be a bad thing. It's negative because the person who's not at the office themselves is not very happy because they're lonesome and they're home with the kiddos, and so the kids hear that.
Another issue that comes up when these families are acknowledging, and there's a family leader or a business leader who's trying to address the situation, is there's someone in that system who has a really difficult personality, really challenging, creates some high conflict situations. So when you hear that, how do you advise families? How do you get them started down a productive path? What can they do if there's, do you see what I'm asking? Someone in that system is really, really difficult.
I guess for me, beginning with what is the fear? If we talk to this person, what is the anxiety? What's the power that's held? And just to identify that.
It's really hard answer. At some point within the business, not the family, but within the business, if there's a family member who is causing turmoil, whether it's with substance abuse issues, poor performance, simply being a pain in the neck, you want to counsel that person as much as you can, but at some point, the employment may end. It's very sad. You hate for that to happen, and that's a last resort, but you cannot let one family member or two family members in a larger structure continue in behavior that is bad for the family and everybody else in the company it is cognizant of on a daily basis. So if you've got 30 employees who are seeing a family member in the business performing poorly, exhibiting behaviors that are certainly non-productive, substance abuse issues, that can only go on so long without it having a huge ripple effect on the entire organization. And so fix it as best you can. Work hard to fix it. Give it your best shot. And at some point say, I'm sorry. You're still in the family. We love you. We'll help you take care of things, but adios.
And it also seems important to validate people's experience in the business and whether they're family or not, the other people in the business, to validate that we understand there's a problem and we are developing a plan to do something about it. And my experience is that it's often kept in a very small conversation because there's embarrassment, there's shame, there's let's keep this under wraps, let's just slip this person away, and we're not going to, we're not going to even talk about it. And the employees are fully aware and they watch you.
There are no secrets.
Yeah, and so your transparency and your vulnerability with boundaries, you don't have to tell the person's story. You don't have, that's really important that you don't. The boundaries within the family are really important, particularly around this kind of stuff. Just that we hear you and we understand that what you're seeing is a problem and we're developing a plan to do something about it, I think is also an important component.
But if the employees see or the behavior that's non-productive in the workplace, they see it day by day. You don't have to tell them about it. It's there in what they're saying. You're not doing anything about it, and that's very demoralizing.
So when have you had to address these situations with non-family?
Mm-hmm.
And what is how does that turn out? How does that move forward? Does that help create that acknowledgement and now we can address it?
Well, the important thing is to make sure that non-family members know that they're heard, that the family knows that they know, and that something's going to happen. The worst thing you can do is acknowledge, yep, we know that you know, and yep, we know there's a problem, and no, we're not going to do anything. That's just the morale just slips down the tank.
And then the resentment towards the family grows exponentially.
Yeah, because I couldn't get away with it.
No.
You know, I'd
be fired yesterday.
Yeah, I've been out of here.
Now, this also increases the pressure, doesn't it, on any of the family members within the business? Even though they may not be the person with the challenge, with the specific challenge.
Sure it does.
Sure.
You're
You're a reflection of, your family is a reflection, especially in family businesses, you are a reflection of the group.
We've worked with several families recently where you're actually putting in writing sort of, here's how we're going to behave, here's how we're going to do things, here's what's okay in the business, here's what's not okay in the business, and we sign it, and we come back a bit later and say, how are we doing? And we need to make some corrections here because
So there's accountability and
There's
follow-up, it's not
accountability.
just a grand plan that never
Right.
gets looked at
right,
again.
right.
And specific behaviors within.
Oh, yeah. You need to work harder than anybody else in business. Whether you like it or not, you've got to show up. You may have to stay late. You can't grouse. You've got to set an example. And it's unfortunate. That's not what I want to do, but that's the nature of the business. You really want to say, if you don't want to be in the business, that's fine. We'll love you. But if you're going to be in the business, you're wearing that jersey with the family name on the back of it every step of the way. And employees will know when you're slacking.
So we had a submitted question about divorce. Yes, and so I guess I think of it, Stacey, again, thinking of the system and how that has an impact, top to bottom, in terms of what can happen. And long-term, the other thing that happens, right, is downstream, all the different decisions that one point of divorce makes with the next generation, subsequent spouses, all kinds of things. And then, of course, Lynn, in the business, particularly if that spouse is working in the business, very, very challenging. How do you help family businesses struggling with divorce? What do they need to know?
Well, let's complicate it even more. Let's suppose there's a divorce and a remarriage, and you've got then youngsters in the business, one parent the same, other parent not the same. I have a built-in bias against spouses working in the business. Now, if they're co-founders, I understand that you've got equal parts there, but I think that's a source of problem. I think there's, in terms of transition of ownership, I think you had to be very careful about who can own stock. The classic example, of course, is you've given stock has gone to the second generation, and there's no agreement within the second generation about ownership. There's a divorce, and the spouse that nobody likes, male or female, all of a sudden ends up with stock in business and wants to come back and be a part of running the business. Nobody likes that person. There are lots of legal things you can do to protect against that. I'll stop here in a moment, but you hit on something at the very beginning that really applies here. This has to do with the nature of prenuptial agreements. They can be very important, but if you're going to have one, really work it out well in advance of the wedding. Don't spring a prenuptial agreement on your soon-to-be spouse the night before the wedding. I've seen that
Are
happen.
you okay?
And it leads to unhappy consequences. It's not that the spouse wanted to do something, but if we can't talk about it beforehand.
And it may have come from on high.
Oh, sure.
It's,
Oh, sure. But
we're not walking down the aisle until you get,
well, let's
See
figure
your
this out.
sign.
Let's figure this out in advance.
well, divorce in general is hard for everyone and depending on the age of the children and in family businesses, I think it just is so complicated with everything you said with the legalities and so I don't know what I'd say. Just in general, I think it would be case by case about how do you take care of yourself. And like for the players, the primary players, how do you help them have the ability to be respectful as much as possible, particularly if they are working together, how to have healthy boundaries, how to not triangulate the children
Are the employees.
Are the employees against, for or against, are they, have a betting pool or, who knows what's going on. But that can be, there's a loyalty and particularly if there's both spouses have worked in the business, you worked under the wife and you worked under the husband, so there's a loyalty and so I think it's very complicated with the employees. And then you have your family who's in there and trying to show up and have their head in the game and their parents are choosing to get divorced. And maybe the parents have been able to, like I said at the beginning, the great ability to hide things, hide problems, and they may not know. And it may be as much a surprise to the children who are working for them. It often isn't, but it's just shocking. And it's always disruptive that the people that had a union and they were your parents are now deciding that relationship is no longer tenable or important. And so I think if at all possible for people to share the importance and respect and try to have healthy boundaries around not throwing the other people under the bus. And yeah, just good boundaries always on top of everything else.
And I think it's important to say, I believe you would agree, that you can do the best you can in the situation of a divorce in the business. You can do everything right, and it's still going to be awful. You can't make it pretty. You just can't get there.
And then we've had discussions about later on the new family coming in and so that's a whole other part that now there's a new person who's married into the family and they have taken on this role, and how do you introduce them to the family? What does that look like? What is their role? Are people fearful that they're going to now have stock? What did they come in with? Is there a prenup? There's just so much anxiety. And so that again is the clear communication with healthy boundaries, not too much information, but we have a plan and this is for the primary family members, that this is how that looks, to not keep things a secret. Because that, secrets just bloom into whatever you want to make them into.
I mean, if you have a shareholders agreement that has all the distribution of stock lineal, forever and ever, never to a spouse, then that may or may not be the perfect thing, but make sure that the incoming spouse knows that. Yeah, I mean, that's quite common, but it's also quite common to never tell anybody.
I never tell him. Wow.
We just don't want to talk about it.
No.
I actually met a second generation business owner who delayed their exit from the business because they saw a quote potential divorce in the third generation. They did not care for the spouse that their child had married. So
Why? I mean, not why they didn't care for the spouse, but why would you delay your exit? I mean, is the spouse?
So the spouse didn't get to move up, or?
they were concerned to pass the business leadership down to the next generation when they saw this potential fracture in the family.
like it wouldn't be stable or.
Well, it's possible, I suppose. You can only delay so long and find so many excuses not to pass it along, if that's what you want to do.
So you had the conversation with your child about your fears?
I would. I'd like to say I would. It's easy to say.
It's loaded though, because if they're only thinking about divorce or they're not divorcing you.
Not even thought about
I
it.
mean, you just heard the rumor, right?
Why are you thinking about it?
And there's risk involved. There's risk involved in a lot of these conversations. And that's part of life. If you are truly living, you're gonna encounter risk. That's just how that goes.
That comes back to the point, there's no perfect solution to any of these problems. You can seek good solutions, but you start trying to find perfect solutions, you're going to spend a lot of time and money.
Let me ask you, one of the themes that's running through our conversation is the family identity and the business identity. How do you help your business families separate the two? What can they do to build up, if you will, that family identity outside of the business identity, and how do they honor the business separate from the family? I think those roles are important.
I tend to want to keep them separate, particularly if everybody's involved in the business, and that changes the dynamic. I think if you've got a family, I'm thinking of a family where the first generation owns the business and there's a second generation, one person's in the business, three people aren't in the business and likely never will be. They've got their own careers. But this business really generates the potential for lots of wealth transfer over time. So when you're talking generally running the business, I'm not going to engage with the kids who aren't in the business. But when you're talking wealth, I'm going to engage everybody, and that's necessarily going to make me talk about business. I'm going to have to talk about how successful the business is. I'm going to have to talk about what our assets are. But as a parent in that situation, you've also got to talk about your other assets, because that gives assurance to those folks not in the business. So there's a family meeting, family council stuff where you talk about all the assets. Then there's a business meeting where you talk about business, and that doesn't involve.
And the assets are more than monetary. They're all about
Absolutely.
rituals,
Yeah.
the values,
Yep.
and even what do we do as a family? Do we volunteer, not as the business, but you see it around Portland all the time, that families are very involved in volunteerism and they don't always have their name on the back of their shirt. But you might see the whole family out there, and it gives them time together. And I don't know about vacations. I was thinking, but I've heard horror stories of families going on vacations and because all the work stuff comes out and they've had enough to drink and it's warm, right? So they're on a cruise, and then the fight starts, and because they're not in the office, right? So I don't know if that's but it is a way that families can do things together.
I think it's absolutely impossible to say to a business person, particularly running a family business, when you're on vacation, don't do anything with the business. Completely separate yourself and have a great deal of fun. Not going to happen.
It's what's on your mind.
But establish some okay, from 5 to 7 in the morning, you're going to do this. And after that, we're going to go off and do some stuff.
And I read something last night that I thought was interesting that I want to follow up on. The title was Family Business Morphing into Business Family. That it shifts that paradigm, and I'd like to read more about that.
Tell me about conversations you have to have with the business leader who is trying to make family decisions. They're a founder, or you know who I'm talking about, those executives who think there's a command and control. And when that person goes away in that system, it's very difficult for the next generation to solve their own problems, because they've always gone back to that decision maker.
So the question is, what happens when they go away, or?
How do you have the conversation with the decision maker to help them realize their impact, even though it's well-intentioned on the system?
Yeah, let go. How do you say to generation, pick a generation one, and you've begun to transition to the next generation, it's time for you to be quiet and let Molly make her own mistakes, or let whoever make their own mistakes. You may have to pick them up, but every time they make a mistake, they're going to learn. If they don't make any mistakes, they're not going to learn. You need to just stick a sock in it.
Yes, I concur. And it's very much the same as with people having children with addiction, and the need for the parent to allow that person to go get into their own life and to become an adult, and to not enable, which then leads to disabling the system. And so that taking the hands off is the same thing, and transferring that the ownership of this individuated, differentiated child into their adult life, and supporting them, and giving them the message that I see you as competent and capable. I may need a sock. We used to say sock and then duct tape around it. That just to not overmanage it, and trust that they'll find their way, and it's respectful of this person that you've brought up. It's showing them that you trust that they're capable and competent. When we, pick them up all the time and saying, I don't think you're capable.
We tend to think, as sort of the senior generation, that we never made a mistake. So we see the next generation making a mistake, and we think, well, how
Can't have
terrible
any
is
of those,
that?
right?
And if we could just reflect on our own lives, I think we often can find ample descriptions of where we probably did things at least as bad.
So talk about mentoring, and how can that happen in a productive and healthy way? Particularly, maybe you have some time compressions. You've delayed your exit, but now you've got to get the successor ready.
So you're having the founder be the mentor?
Possibly. I think if you're compressed for time, that's what has to happen.
I really like outside mentors. I'm sure, learn as much as you can, but also learn from your peers. I like the notion of a person running a business having a bigger group of folks who are doing similar things, can provide social and moral support along the way. They've all had to deal with the previous generation, whether it's, there are Vistage, there's YPO, there's a variety of other organizations that provide you access to people who are going through the same thing. You can get some mentors there, I think, that may actually be at least as good as in the family.
Yeah. Again, that goes back to the last question. If that person can let go and step back and be a mentor at the same time, that's a hard thing to do. I'm going to show you how this is done. This is how we do it. So I'm mentoring you in the process, and you're going to do it this way, which is my way. And what if, and that person, they don't have the autonomy to they may, it depends on the person. I would imagine that if they're pretty open, that they would say, oh, that's an interesting idea. And that in the dynamic between the two of them, that the person being mentored felt safe enough to say, no, I don't think I want to do it that way. I would like to try this, or I had this idea, that they felt safe enough in that power dynamic. And if it was a more, level or open or safe, that they could use a parent mentor. But
and we often think when our parents start saying something to us that they're about to judge us. Mentors, in my opinion, don't judge. Mentors teach. Mentors train. Mentors provide support. Mentors encourage. They don't judge. They may say, here's what I've seen, here's what I think, but they don't say that's bad.
And in the recovery community, it's all about mentors. It's all about peers, that it's peer-to-peer. There's nobody in charge at AA. There might be the person who's going to lead the meeting, but they don't have any more or less power. And they've also, what you said earlier, they've experienced it.
Mhm.
They maybe have done it before you. Maybe they have 10 minutes on you, or they've had 10 years on you, but that you can hear them in a different voice because they get you, and they're not your parent. And yeah, they can walk side by side with you. It's a very different relationship than even a therapist and a person. Their support group in the recovery community is very different.
So we're getting close to the end of our time, and we've addressed one of the questions that has come in live and the others that came in through registration. So as we close, I want to circle back to the concept of resilience, and also the concept, Lynn, that you talked about, how you're seeing the challenge, the biggest challenge has been the exit. So as we wrap up, what in your mind would be most helpful to families to consider and think about to facilitate that exit? How can they build their resilience skills? Because that exit is such an important transition, and they can be more comfortable and more confident about that.
You don't retire, and speaking as a retiree, is that you don't retire from something, you retire to something. So if you're going to exit, have something to do. Have good estate plans, know how and good retirement planning. Do not depend on the success of your kid to pay for your retirement. That's folly. You will end up working somewhere, probably not where you wish. So have something to do. Do something outside, and go. If you want to start another business, go do that, but do it on your own. Get away and plan. Plan.
And as far as resilience, I think you build resilience by, which may seem counterintuitive, you build resilience by taking risk. You build and finding out that you're capable, finding out that you don't know how to do something, but that you allow yourself to be vulnerable and to take some risks, and find the people that support you, find how you support yourself. That's how we become resilient. If we stay away and watch and wait and try to build it by just reading something about resilience, it doesn't happen in the same way as like really putting yourself in a position of measured risk maybe at first.
No one ever learned to dive off of a high board without diving off of a high board.
Exactly.
Didn't happen.
Well, I guess we're going to close for today. I want to thank you both. You've been very gracious with your time and with your expertise. And I want to let everyone know that we are going to have more Family Business 360. We've got one more webinar through the end of May, and then several of our programs both in Salem and Lake Oswego. So we hope that you'll join us either in person or online. Thanks, everyone.